The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty general store, and Zelda Norton pressed her hand against her stomach, feeling the small swell beneath her traveling dress that would soon be impossible to hide. She had made a terrible mistake accepting Zachary Trent's proposal through letters, and now she stood on the edge of Marysville, Kansas, in the sweltering heat of July 1878, carrying another man's child and facing a future built on deception. Her fingers trembled as she gathered her small carpetbag and stepped down from the stagecoach, boots hitting the packed earth with a soft thud. The main street stretched before her, lined with wooden buildings that seemed to shimmer in the afternoon heat. A few townspeople paused in their activities to stare at the newcomer, their faces curious but not unkind. Zelda straightened her shoulders and smoothed her dark blue traveling dress, trying to calm the thundering of her heart. She had written to Zachary 3 months ago, responding to his advertisement in the Boston newspaper. He had seemed kind in his letters, describing his cattle ranch outside of town and his desire for a wife to share his life. What he did not know, what she had not told him, was that she was fleeing Boston in disgrace, pregnant by a man who had promised her marriage and then disappeared when she told him about the baby. Her aunt had given her an ultimatum: find a husband quickly or be sent to a home for unwed mothers. Zelda had chosen what seemed like the lesser of two evils. Now, standing in the Kansas heat with dust settling on her hem, she wondered if she had made everything worse. "Miss Norton." A deep voice spoke from behind her, and Zelda turned to find herself looking up at a tall man with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. He held his hat in his hands, revealing dark hair streaked with early touches of silver at the temples, though he could not have been more than 30. His face was handsome in a rugged way, with strong features and a firm jaw. He wore simple ranch clothes, clean but well worn, and regarded her with an expression that seemed equal parts hope and nervousness. "Mr. Trent." Zelda's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Yes, madam, Zachary Trent. Welcome to Marysville." He offered a slight smile that softened his features. "I hope your journey was not too difficult. It was long, but I am well enough." The lie felt heavy on her tongue. She had been sick most mornings, struggling to keep down what little food she could manage. The journey had been exhausting, but she had no choice but to endure it. Zachary reached for her carpetbag, and their fingers brushed briefly. Zelda pulled back as if burned, her guilt making her jumpy. If he noticed, he did not comment, simply taking her bag and gesturing toward a wagon hitched nearby. "I thought we might speak a bit before heading to the ranch," he said, leading her toward the wagon. "There is a small restaurant just down the street, unless you would prefer to rest first." "No, speaking would be fine." Zelda's throat tightened. She needed to tell him the truth before they went any further. It was not fair to let him believe she was the virtuous young woman her letters had suggested. She had been virtuous once, before she had trusted the wrong man with her heart and her future. They walked in awkward silence to a small establishment with a painted sign declaring it Martha's Kitchen. Inside, the air was slightly cooler, and the smell of fresh bread and coffee filled the space. Only 2 other tables were occupied, and Zachary led her to one in the corner, away from curious ears. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair approached their table. "Zachary Trent, as I live and breathe, and you must be the bride we have all been hearing about." "Welcome to Marysville, dear." "Thank you," Zelda managed, though the word bride made her stomach clench. "Martha, could we have some coffee and whatever you have ready for lunch?" Zachary asked. "Of course. I will bring it right out." Martha bustled away, leaving them alone. Zachary folded his hands on the table, his expression earnest. "I want you to know that I am glad you came. I know this is strange, agreeing to marry someone you have only known through letters, but I meant everything I wrote. I have a good ranch, enough to provide a comfortable life. I am not a rich man, but I work hard and I would treat you well." Each kind word was like a knife to Zelda's conscience. She took a breath, steeling herself. "Mr. Trent, there is something I must tell you before we go any further." He tilted his head slightly, concern flickering in his eyes. "What is it?" "I have not been entirely truthful with you." Her voice shook despite her efforts to keep it steady. "In my letters, I led you to believe that I was simply a woman seeking a fresh start in the West. That was true, but not the whole truth." Zachary said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "I am with child," Zelda forced the words out, her cheeks burning with shame. "The father was a man in Boston who promised to marry me and then vanished. I am nearly 3 months along. I understand if you want me to leave. I can work to earn money for a ticket back, or perhaps find employment here in town. I should never have deceived you, but I was desperate and I thought—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Zelda could not bear to look at him, could not stand to see the disgust or anger she was sure would be written across his face. She stared at her hands, folded tightly in her lap, and waited for his judgment. "Look at me," Zachary said quietly, slowly. Zelda raised her eyes to meet his. What she saw there was not what she expected. His expression was serious, thoughtful, but not cruel. He seemed to be weighing something in his mind. "This man in Boston," he said finally. "Do you love him still?" The question caught her off guard. "No, I do not think I ever truly did. I was foolish and lonely, and he said what I wanted to hear. I know now that he never intended to keep his promises." Zachary nodded slowly. "And the child? Do you want this baby?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. Whatever mistakes she had made, the life growing inside her was innocent. "I know the circumstances are not ideal, but this child is mine, and I will love it." Martha returned then with a tray bearing 2 cups of coffee, plates of beef stew, and thick slices of bread. She set everything down with a cheerful smile, seeming not to notice the tension at the table, and then left them to their meal. Zachary picked up his coffee, took a long drink, and then set the cup down carefully. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Norton." Zelda held her breath. "Marry me as we planned. Come to the ranch as my wife. When the baby is born, I will raise the child as my own. As far as anyone in this town needs to know, the baby is mine. We can say we were married before you came west, and you stayed behind to settle your affairs. No one needs to know the truth." Zelda stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You cannot mean that." "I do mean it." His voice was firm, his gray eyes steady on hers. "I am 31 years old, Miss Norton. I have worked my ranch alone for 8 years since my father died. I have wanted a family for a long time, but there are few unmarried women in these parts, and none who were interested in the life of a rancher's wife. When I placed that advertisement, I was looking for a partner, someone to build a life with. You made a mistake in trusting the wrong man. That does not make you unworthy of a second chance." "But the child is not yours," Zelda protested, even as hope began to kindle in her chest. "You would be taking on another man's responsibility." "The child will be mine in every way that matters if I raise it from birth," Zachary said. "I will be the one who teaches the child to walk and ride a horse. I will be the one who sits up with you when the baby is sick. I will be the father this child knows. Blood is not the only thing that makes a family." Tears stung Zelda's eyes, and she blinked rapidly, trying to maintain her composure. "Why would you do this? You do not even know me. I know what you have written in your letters. I know you are educated, that you lost your parents to fever when you were 16, that you have been living with your aunt since then. I know you like to read, that you are not afraid of hard work and that you have a kind heart. Is that not enough to build on?" He paused, then added more softly, "And I know that you are brave enough to tell me the truth when you could have hidden it until it was too late. That says something about your character." Zelda wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I do not deserve such kindness." "Everyone deserves kindness, Miss Norton, and everyone deserves a chance to start over." Zachary reached across the table, his hand open in invitation. "What do you say? Will you marry me?" For a long moment, Zelda looked at his outstretched hand. This was not how she had imagined her life would unfold. She had dreamed once of marrying for love, of a courtship filled with romance and passion. Instead, she was sitting in a small restaurant in Kansas, being offered a marriage of convenience by a stranger who was willing to claim another man's child as his own. But as she looked into Zachary's steady gray eyes, she saw something there that gave her courage. She saw decency and strength, and perhaps the possibility of something more if given time. She placed her hand in his. "Yes, I will marry you." His fingers closed gently around hers, warm and calloused from years of ranch work. "Then we will go to the church after we eat and speak to Reverend Michaels. If he can perform the ceremony today, we can start our life together right away." They ate their meal in more comfortable silence, occasionally exchanging small comments about the food or the town. Zelda found herself studying him when he was not looking, trying to reconcile the man before her with the generous offer he had just made. He had a quiet strength about him, a steadiness that was reassuring after the chaos and fear of the past few months. After they finished eating, Zachary paid for their meal and offered Zelda his arm. They walked together through the town, and Zelda noticed how several people greeted Zachary with friendly waves or nods. He seemed well respected here, which eased some of her anxiety. At least she would not be isolated with a stranger who might turn cruel once they were alone. The church was a simple white building with a modest steeple. Zachary pushed open the door, and they stepped into the cool interior. A man in his 50s, wearing the collar of a reverend, looked up from where he was arranging hymnals in the pews. "Zachary, good to see you," the reverend said with a warm smile. "And this must be Miss Norton." "Good afternoon, Reverend Michaels," Zachary replied. "We were hoping you might be able to perform a marriage ceremony today." The reverend's eyebrows rose slightly. "Today? Well, that is rather sudden. Are you certain you do not want a few days to prepare? Let the town gather for a proper celebration." "We are certain," Zachary said firmly. "We would prefer something simple and soon." Reverend Michaels looked between them, his gaze assessing but not unkind. "Very well. I will need 2 witnesses. Let me send for my wife, and perhaps we can ask someone from the general store to stand in as well." Within an hour, Zelda found herself standing beside Zachary at the front of the church, with Reverend Michaels before them and his wife along with the general store owner as witnesses. She still wore her dusty traveling dress, and there were no flowers or music. But as the Reverend began to speak the words of the marriage ceremony, Zelda felt the weight of the moment settle over her. "Do you, Zachary Trent, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Zachary said, his voice clear and steady. "And do you, Zelda Norton, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Zelda's voice trembled only slightly. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Zachary turned to her, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. Then he leaned down and pressed a brief, gentle kiss to her lips. It was chaste and respectful, but Zelda felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with the baby she carried. They signed the marriage certificate, and suddenly it was done. She was Mrs. Zachary Trent, the wife of a Kansas rancher, and the mother-to-be of a child that would bear his name. The ride to the ranch took about 40 minutes, the wagon rattling along a well-worn path that cut through open prairie. The landscape was different from anything Zelda had known in Boston. Here, the sky seemed impossibly wide, stretching endlessly in all directions. Tall grass swayed in the breeze, and in the distance, she could see clusters of cattle grazing. "It is beautiful," she said softly, meaning it. There was something peaceful about the vast openness, something that made her feel like she could breathe properly for the first time in months. "I have always thought so," Zachary agreed. "It is hard work, ranching, and some years are better than others, but I cannot imagine living any other way." The ranch house came into view as they crested a small rise. It was a solid structure, built of wood with a wide front porch and a stone chimney. Not large, but well-maintained and welcoming. Behind it stood a barn and several smaller outbuildings, all neat and orderly. Zachary helped her down from the wagon, his hands firm around her waist. For a moment they stood close together, and Zelda felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the summer heat. "Welcome home," he said quietly. Inside, the house was simply furnished but clean. The main room held a stone fireplace, a comfortable-looking sofa, and a sturdy table with chairs. A kitchen area occupied one corner, with a cast-iron stove and shelves lined with dishes and supplies. 2 doors led off the main room, presumably to bedrooms. "I will put your things in the bedroom," Zachary said, picking up her carpet bag. "You should rest. I know the journey must have been tiring." "Where will you sleep?" Zelda asked, suddenly nervous. Zachary paused, understanding her concern. "There are 2 bedrooms. You will have your privacy until you are comfortable with other arrangements. I am not expecting anything from you right away, Zelda. We barely know each other. I hope in time we can build a real marriage, but there is no rush." The relief that washed over her must have shown on her face because he gave her a reassuring smile. "I will show you around tomorrow," he continued. "For now, rest. I need to check on the stock and make sure everything is settled for the evening. There is water in the pitcher by the wash basin, and I will bring in fresh water from the well later." After he left, Zelda explored the bedroom that was to be hers. It held a sturdy bed with a simple quilt, a dresser with a mirror, and a washstand. A window looked out over the prairie, and she stood there for a long moment, watching the grass ripple in the wind. She had done it. She had married a stranger and traveled halfway across the country to start a new life. Now she just had to figure out how to build that life, and whether the kindness Zachary had shown her today would last when reality set in. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Zelda woke early each morning, usually to find that Zachary had already been up for hours, tending to the cattle and horses. She took over the household duties, cooking meals, cleaning, and managing the small vegetable garden behind the house. It was different from the life she had known in Boston, where her aunt had employed servants to handle such work. Here, everything depended on her own efforts, and she found a strange satisfaction in the labor. Zachary was patient and considerate, always respectful of her space. They ate their meals together, and in the evenings after the work was done, they would sit on the porch and talk. Slowly, through these conversations, they began to know each other beyond the surface details they had shared in letters. She learned that Zachary's mother had died when he was 12, and his father had raised him alone, teaching him everything about ranching. He had one sister, married and living in Denver, whom he saw only occasionally. He liked to read when he had time, favoring adventure stories and historical accounts. He was quiet by nature, but had a dry sense of humor that occasionally surprised her into laughter. In turn, she told him more about her life in Boston, about her parents and the happy childhood she had known before the fever took them. She spoke of her aunt, a stern woman who had taken her in out of duty rather than love, and of the loneliness that had made her vulnerable to false promises. She did not speak much about the man who had fathered her child, and Zachary did not press her for details. It was enough that the past was the past, and they were building something new. As the weeks passed, Zelda felt the baby growing inside her. By the end of August, there was no hiding the swell of her belly, and she was grateful that they lived far enough from town that casual visitors were rare. The few neighbors they had were friendly but respected their privacy, and if anyone suspected the timing of the pregnancy was unusual, they kept such thoughts to themselves. One evening in early September, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Zachary reached over and took her hand. It was not the first time he had done so, but there was something different in the gesture this time, something more deliberate. "Zelda," he said quietly, "I want you to know that I do not regret my decision, not for a single moment." She turned to look at him, surprised by the sudden declaration. "What brought this on?" "I see you sometimes, when you are working in the garden or cooking dinner, and you have this look on your face, like you are waiting for something bad to happen, like you are still expecting me to turn you away." He squeezed her hand gently. "I wanted you to know that I will not. You are my wife, and that baby you are carrying is my child. I mean that with everything I am." Tears pricked at Zelda's eyes as they seemed to do so easily these days. "I am still afraid sometimes," she admitted. "Afraid that I do not deserve this, that I will somehow ruin it." "You deserve to be happy," Zachary said firmly. "And I am going to do my best to make sure you are." He leaned in then and kissed her. It was not like the chaste kiss they had shared at their wedding. This was deeper, more intentional, and Zelda found herself responding, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest. When they finally pulled apart, both were slightly breathless. "I think," Zelda said softly, "that I would like to be a proper wife to you, if you still want that." "I want that very much," Zachary replied, his voice rough with emotion. That night, Zelda moved her few belongings into Zachary's bedroom, and they began their marriage in truth. He was gentle and patient, mindful of her condition, and Zelda felt something shift inside her. This was not the passionate but ultimately shallow affair she had known in Boston. This was something deeper, built on respect and growing affection, and she thought it might be the beginning of real love. As autumn painted the prairie in golds and russets, Zelda found herself genuinely happy for the first time in months. She and Zachary worked side by side, preparing for the coming winter and the baby that would arrive in the new year. He built a cradle in his spare time, sanding the wood until it was smooth and safe. She sewed tiny clothes, marveling at how small the garments were. In late October, they made a trip to town for supplies. Zelda wore a loose dress that did little to hide her condition, but she held her head high as she walked beside Zachary. Several townspeople greeted them warmly, and Martha from the restaurant made a point of congratulating them on the coming baby. "You are glowing, dear," Martha said, patting Zelda's hand. "Motherhood suits you already." At the general store, the owner's wife, a kind woman named Helen, pulled Zelda aside. "If you need anything, or if you have questions as your time gets closer, please do not hesitate to come find me. I have had 4 children of my own, and I have helped deliver more babies than I can count. There is a doctor in town, but he is not always available, so it is good to have someone who knows what to expect." Zelda thanked her, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She had been so afraid of judgment, of being ostracized for her condition. Instead, she was finding acceptance and kindness. On the ride back to the ranch, she leaned against Zachary's shoulder. "I think I could be happy here," she said. "I hope you will be," he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I am already happier than I have been in years." Winter came hard and fast to Kansas, bringing with it bitter cold and occasional snowstorms. Zachary worked tirelessly to keep the stock fed and safe, often coming in from the cold with his face red and his hands nearly numb. Zelda would have hot coffee waiting and thick stews or roasts to warm him. On the nights when the wind howled outside, they would sit close by the fire, and Zachary would read aloud while Zelda sewed or knitted. Sometimes he would rest his hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick and move, and his face would light up with wonder. "Strong little thing," he would say with a smile. "Going to be a fighter." Christmas came and went quietly, just the two of them exchanging small gifts. Zachary had bought her a beautiful shawl in town, soft and warm. She had made him a new shirt, carefully stitching each seam. They cooked a special dinner and talked late into the night, sharing stories of Christmases past. As the new year of 1879 began, Zelda grew increasingly uncomfortable. The baby seemed to be running out of room and her back ached constantly. Zachary took over more of the household tasks, insisting she rest as much as possible. In mid-January, on a night when the stars were bright and clear in the frozen sky, Zelda woke to a cramping pain in her belly. At first she thought it was just the usual discomfort, but then it came again, stronger and more regular. "Zachary," she said, shaking his shoulder, "I think the baby is coming." He was instantly awake, sitting up and lighting the lamp. "How far apart are the pains? I am not sure." "Not close yet, I think." "I will ride to town and get Helen," he said, already pulling on his clothes. "Will you be all right alone for a few hours?" "Yes, go, hurry." Another contraction gripped her, and she breathed through it, trying to stay calm. Zachary rode hard through the dark, and Zelda was left alone with her fear and pain. She got up and moved around the house, finding that walking helped ease the contractions slightly. She boiled water and laid out clean towels, trying to remember everything she had heard about childbirth from other women. It seemed like an eternity before she heard the sound of the wagon returning. Zachary burst through the door, followed by Helen and her husband, who had driven the wagon while Zachary rode ahead on horseback. "All right, dear. Let us get you to bed and see how things are progressing," Helen said, taking charge with a calm efficiency that was immediately reassuring. The labor was long and difficult. Zelda had not understood how much it would hurt, how exhausting it would be. Helen coached her through each contraction, and between them, Zachary held her hand, his face pale with worry. "You are doing so well," he kept saying. "So strong, just a little more." Finally, as dawn broke on a new day, the baby arrived with a lusty cry. Helen worked quickly, clearing the infant's airways and wrapping the small body in a soft blanket. "You have a son," she announced, placing the baby in Zelda's arms. Zelda looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and perfect, and felt her heart expand in a way she had never imagined possible. This was her son, her child, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. "Can I?" Zachary asked, his voice thick with emotion. Helen helped transfer the baby to his arms, and Zelda watched as her husband looked down at the infant with an expression of pure wonder and love. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "Welcome to the world. I am your papa, and I am going to take such good care of you." Tears streamed down Zelda's face as she watched them together. This man, who had every reason to resent this child, was holding the baby as if he were the most precious thing in existence. "What should we name him?" she asked. Zachary looked up, his own eyes bright with tears. I was thinking, if you approve, we could name him after my father. His name was Thomas. Thomas Trent, Zelda said, testing the name. It is perfect. The next weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings. Thomas was a healthy baby with a strong appetite and powerful lungs. Zachary proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with the baby when he fussed, changing diapers without complaint, and rocking him to sleep with a gentleness that made Zelda fall more in love with him every day. Because that was what was happening, she realized. She was falling in love with her husband. It had crept up on her gradually, built from small moments and quiet kindnesses, but now it was undeniable. When he smiled at her over the baby's head, when he brought her coffee in bed before dawn, when he held her close at night, she felt it. This was love, real and deep and lasting. One evening in early spring, when Thomas was about 3 months old, Zelda sat on the porch with the baby in her arms while Zachary worked on repairing a section of fence nearby. The prairie was coming back to life, green shoots pushing up through the earth, and the air was mild and sweet. Zachary finished his work and came to sit beside her, wiping his hands on his trousers. He reached over to stroke Thomas's soft hair, and the baby gurgled happily. "I have something I need to tell you," Zelda said, her heart beating faster. "What is it?" Zachary asked, concern flickering in his eyes. "I love you," she said simply. "I do not know exactly when it happened, but it is true. I love you, Zachary. Not because you gave me a home or because you are raising Thomas as your own, though I am grateful for those things. I love you because of who you are. You are kind and strong and good, and I cannot imagine my life without you now." Zachary's face transformed, joy washing over his features. "Zelda, I have loved you almost from the beginning. I did not know how to tell you, did not want to pressure you into feeling something you did not. But hearing you say those words, it is everything I have been hoping for." He leaned in and kissed her, tender and sweet, while Thomas squirmed between them, making small baby noises of protest at being squished. They laughed and pulled apart, and Zachary took the baby from her, holding him up to look at him eye to eye. "You hear that, Thomas? Your mama loves me. We are a real family now." As spring turned to summer, life on the ranch settled into a happy routine. Thomas grew rapidly, his personality emerging. He was a curious baby, always wanting to see and touch everything. Zachary built a playpen where Thomas could sit safely while they worked, and he would babble and play with his toys, content to be near his parents. The ranch was doing well. Zachary's cattle were healthy, and he was able to hire a young man named Samuel to help with some of the heavier work. This gave him more time to spend with Zelda and Thomas, and the three of them would often go on short trips around the property, Zachary pointing out various features of the land while Thomas gazed around with wide eyes. In August, they celebrated Thomas's first birthday with a small party. Helen and her family came, along with a few other neighbors who had become friends. Martha brought a cake from the restaurant, and Thomas smashed his hands into it with gleeful enthusiasm, getting frosting everywhere. Watching him, Zelda felt a profound sense of gratitude. A year ago, she had been alone and terrified, facing an uncertain future. Now she had a husband who loved her, a beautiful son, and a home that felt truly hers. That night, after their guests had left and Thomas was asleep in his cradle, Zelda and Zachary lay in bed together, tired but content. "This has been the best year of my life," Zachary said, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting on his chest. "Mine too," Zelda agreed. "I never imagined I could be this happy." "I have been thinking," Zachary said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "How would you feel about having another child, one that we planned for together this time?" Zelda lifted her head to look at him, seeing the hope and slight uncertainty in his expression. "I would like that very much." His smile was brilliant. Good, because I want a house full of children. I want Thomas to have brothers and sisters to grow up with. Then we will work on that, Zelda said, laughing softly as she pulled him down for a kiss. Over the next year, life continued its steady rhythm. Thomas grew into a toddler, learning to walk and then to run, his laughter a constant sound around the ranch. He adored Zachary, following him everywhere he could, wanting to help with even the smallest tasks. Zachary was endlessly patient, teaching him about the animals and the land with a gentleness that made Zelda's heart swell. In the spring of 1880, Zelda discovered she was pregnant again. This time, there was no fear or shame, only joy and excitement. Zachary was thrilled, and even Thomas seemed to sense something special was happening, patting his mother's growing belly with his small hands. "Baby," Zelda would say, guiding his hand to feel the movements inside her. "You are going to be a big brother." This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Zelda was not carrying the weight of guilt and fear along with the child. She felt healthy and strong, and Zachary doted on her, making sure she did not overwork herself. In November, as the first snows began to fall, Zelda went into labor. This time, the process was faster, and Helen arrived in time to help deliver a beautiful baby girl with dark hair and gray eyes like her father. "Another perfect child," Helen pronounced, handing the baby to Zelda. "You two make beautiful babies." Zachary held Thomas on his lap while Zelda cradled their daughter. "What should we name her?" he asked. "I was thinking Rose," Zelda said, "after my mother." "Rose Trent," Zachary repeated. "It is beautiful. Hello, Rose. I am your papa and this is your big brother, Thomas." Thomas reached out to touch his sister's tiny hand, his face serious and curious. "Baby," he said clearly, one of his favorite words. "That is right, your baby sister," Zachary confirmed. The household adjusted to the new addition. Thomas was initially fascinated by his sister, though he sometimes became jealous when she took up too much of his parents' attention. Zachary made sure to spend special time with him each day, taking him on small adventures around the ranch while Zelda nursed Rose or caught up on sleep. Watching Zachary with both children, Zelda often found herself overwhelmed with emotion. He treated them exactly the same, with equal love and devotion. There was never any difference in how he spoke to Thomas or held him compared to Rose. He was their father in every sense of the word. One day in early spring, when Thomas was 3 and Rose was about 6 months old, a stranger came to the ranch. Zelda was in the garden with both children when she heard the sound of a horse approaching. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun to see who was coming. The man who dismounted was well dressed in clothes that marked him as someone from the city. He was handsome in a polished way, with blonde hair and blue eyes, and as he approached, Zelda felt her stomach drop with recognition. It was Charles Whitmore, the man who had fathered Thomas and then abandoned her. "Zelda," he said, removing his hat, "I did not expect to find you here. What are you doing here?" Her voice came out harsher than she intended, but she could not help it. She instinctively moved to place herself between Charles and the children. "I was passing through on business and heard in town that a Mrs. Trent lived out this way. I remembered you had mentioned your mother's maiden name was Trent, so I thought I would stop by on the chance it was you." His eyes moved past her to where Thomas was playing in the dirt. "Is that boy yours?" "Yes, and my daughter as well." Zelda's heart was pounding. "I am married now. This is my home, and I would appreciate it if you would leave." "Married?" Charles looked surprised. "But you were only a few months along when I last saw you. Who would have married you in that condition?" "A good man," Zelda said firmly. "A better man than you will ever be." Before Charles could respond, Zachary came around the side of the house, clearly having heard the voices. He took in the scene quickly, his expression darkening as he approached. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice level but with an edge of steel. "This is Charles Whitmore," Zelda said, her voice shaking slightly. "He was just leaving." Charles looked between them, and something calculating entered his expression. "Are you the husband? Did you know that boy is not yours?" "That boy is mine in every way that matters," Zachary said, stepping forward to stand beside Zelda. "I have been his father since before he was born. I am the one who has walked him when he was sick, taught him his first words, held him when he cried. What have you done for him? Nothing. You abandoned his mother when she needed you most." "Now wait a moment," Charles began, his face reddening. "No, you wait," Zachary cut him off. "You have no claim here. No rights. That is my son, this is my wife, and you are trespassing on my land. I am going to give you one chance to leave peacefully before I make you leave." Charles looked at Zachary's stern face and seemed to realize he was outmatched. "I did not come here to cause trouble. I just wanted to see if Zelda was all right. She is more than all right. She is happy and loved and building a good life, something she could never have had with you." Zachary's voice was hard. "Now get on your horse and ride away. If I ever see you near my family again, we will have a very different kind of conversation." Charles hesitated, then put his hat back on and walked to his horse. He mounted and looked back once more. "For what it is worth, Zelda, I am sorry." "Your apologies mean nothing," Zelda said coldly. "Goodbye, Charles." They watched him ride away, neither moving until he was out of sight. Then Zachary turned to Zelda, pulling her into his arms. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle now. "Yes," Zelda said, clinging to him. "I was afraid for a moment that he might try to claim Thomas, but I should have known you would protect us." "Always," Zachary promised. "He has no claim to our son. Thomas is ours, and nothing and no one is going to change that." Thomas had wandered over during the conversation, and now he tugged on Zachary's pant leg. "Papa up." Zachary scooped him up, holding him close. "I've got you, little man. Papa is right here." That evening, after the children were asleep, Zachary and Zelda talked about what had happened. Zelda found herself unburdening fears she had been carrying since the beginning of their marriage. "I always worried that someday he might come back and try to take Thomas," she confessed, "or that you would change your mind about raising him as your own." "Never," Zachary said firmly. "Zelda, I need you to understand something. From the moment you told me you were pregnant, from the moment I said I would raise that child as mine, Thomas became my son. Not in the eyes of the law necessarily, but in my heart. Nothing could change that. Not some man showing up claiming biology, not anything. He is mine because I chose him, because I love him, just like I chose you and I love you." "I love you so much," Zelda whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I am so grateful." "You deserve every happiness in the world," Zachary told her, wiping away her tears. "And I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it." The encounter with Charles, disturbing as it had been, seemed to settle something in Zelda's heart. She had been holding onto a hidden fear, and facing it head-on had freed her. She threw herself into her life with renewed joy, cherishing every moment with her family. As the years passed, the ranch prospered. Zachary expanded his herd and purchased more land. Samuel proved to be a loyal and hardworking employee, eventually marrying Helen's eldest daughter and building a small house on the far side of the property. The two families became close, sharing meals and celebrations. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the ranch life. He learned to ride almost as soon as he could walk, and by the time he was 5, he was helping Zachary with simple chores, filled with pride at being trusted with real work. Rose was a sweet child, equally at home playing with dolls or following her brother and father around the property. In 1882, Zelda gave birth to another son whom they named Benjamin. He was a quiet baby, content to watch the world around him with solemn dark eyes. Thomas, now 4, took his role as big brother seriously, always checking on the baby and bringing him toys. 2 years later, another daughter arrived, named Clara after Zachary's mother. She was a firecracker from the start, demanding and vocal, keeping everyone on their toes. The house was full of noise and laughter and the controlled chaos of 4 young children. Through it all, Zachary and Zelda's love for each other only deepened. They had weathered challenges together, harsh winters, difficult cattle seasons, childhood illnesses that had them up all night with worry. But they had also shared countless moments of joy. First steps, first words, family dinners around their ever-expanding table, quiet nights on the porch after the children were in bed. One evening in the summer of 1885, Zelda stood in the doorway watching Zachary play with the children in the yard. Thomas, now 6, was teaching Benjamin to throw a ball, while Zachary held Clara and chased after Rose, her delighted shrieks filling the air. Helen, who had stopped by for a visit, came to stand beside Zelda. "You have a beautiful family." "I do," Zelda agreed, her voice full of contentment. "I am blessed beyond measure." "You know," Helen said thoughtfully, "I remember when Zachary first brought you to town back when you were just off that stagecoach. You looked so scared and uncertain, and now look at you. Look at all of this." "I was terrified," Zelda admitted. "I thought my life was over. I never imagined it was actually just beginning." "Zachary is a good man, the best I know." "He is," Zelda said softly. "He saved me in every way a person can be saved." That night, after the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Zelda and Zachary sat together on their bed, his arm around her shoulders. "You ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Taking on a pregnant stranger, raising another man's child?" Zachary was quiet for a moment, as if truly considering the question. Then he shook his head. "Not even once. You and Thomas, you both gave me a purpose I did not even know I was missing. And now with Rose and Benjamin and Clara, I have everything I ever wanted. How could I regret that? I just think about that day sometimes when I arrived and told you the truth. You could have sent me away. Most men would have." "Most men are fools then," Zachary said simply. "Besides, I did not just get Thomas out of that decision, I got you. I got this whole beautiful life we have built together. Every challenge, every happy moment, all of it has been worth it." Zelda tilted her face up to kiss him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. "Thank you," she whispered against his lips, "for choosing us, for loving us." "Thank you for trusting me," he replied, "for giving me the chance to be your husband and a father to our children." They made love that night with the tenderness that comes from years of knowing each other, of understanding each other's hearts and bodies. Afterwards, lying in the darkness with Zachary's steady breathing beside her, Zelda thought about the journey that had brought her here. She had left Boston in shame and fear, carrying a child and facing an unknown future. She had married a stranger out of desperation, not knowing if she was making her situation better or worse. But that stranger had become the love of her life, her partner in every sense of the word. And the child she had carried in fear and uncertainty had become the first of 4 beautiful children who filled their home with love and laughter. Life continued its rhythm through the seasons and years. Thomas grew into a responsible young man, wise beyond his years and devoted to his family and the ranch. At 8 years old, he was already skilled at riding and roping, showing a natural aptitude for ranch work. He was also protective of his younger siblings, patient with their questions and always willing to include them in his activities. One afternoon, when Thomas was 9, he came to Zelda with a serious expression on his face. "Mama, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. What is it?" He fidgeted with the brim of his hat, a gesture he had picked up from Zachary. Some of the boys in town were talking about how babies come and how children look like their parents, and I started thinking about how Rose and Benjamin have Papa's gray eyes, but I do not. My eyes are brown like yours. Zelda's heart clenched. She and Zachary had discussed when and how to tell Thomas the truth of his origins, but they had not expected the question to come so soon. "That is true," she said carefully. "What else were you thinking about?" "I just wondered sometimes if maybe Papa is not my real father. I mean, he is my Papa and I love him more than anything, but I wondered if maybe there was someone else before." Zelda took a deep breath, reaching out to take his hand. "You are very perceptive, Thomas. Come sit with me, and I will tell you the truth." They sat together on the porch steps, and Zelda told him an age-appropriate version of the story. She explained that before she met Zachary, she had known another man who she thought loved her but who left when she became pregnant. She told him how scared she had been, and how Zachary had offered to marry her and raise him as his own son. "So Papa is not my real father?" Thomas asked, his voice small. "Thomas, look at me." Zelda waited until his brown eyes met hers. "Zachary is your real father in every way that matters. Being a father is not just about blood. It is about showing up every day, teaching and guiding and loving. Your Papa has done all of that since before you were even born. The man who helped create you, he was never your father. He was just a man who ran away from responsibility. Do you understand?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Then he asked, "Does Papa know about the other man?" "Yes, he has always known. I told him before we got married, and he still chose to be your father. He chose you, Thomas. Can I talk to Papa about this?" "Of course." "He is out by the barn. Do you want me to come with you?" Thomas shook his head. "I think I need to talk to him alone." Zelda watched him walk across the yard toward the barn, her heart heavy with worry. She had always known this conversation would come someday, but that did not make it any easier. Inside the barn, Zachary was repairing a saddle when Thomas appeared. He looked up with a smile that faded when he saw his son's serious expression. "What is wrong, son?" "Mama told me about my real father," Thomas said without preamble, "the one who left before I was born." Zachary set down the saddle and gave Thomas his full attention. "She did. What did she tell you?" "That there was another man before you and that he left when she was pregnant, and that you married her and said you would raise me as yours." Thomas's voice wavered slightly. "Is that true?" "Every word of it," Zachary confirmed. "Come here, sit down." They sat together on a hay bale and Zachary put his arm around Thomas's shoulders. "What else did your mama tell you?" "That you are my real father because you chose me. That the other man was not really my father at all." "Your mama is right. Thomas, I want you to know something. The day I met your mother when she told me she was carrying another man's child, I could have walked away. A lot of men would have. But when I looked at her, I saw someone brave and honest who had made a mistake and was trying to do right by her baby. I saw someone I could build a life with. And when I thought about that baby, I did not think of it as someone else's responsibility. I thought about how much I wanted to be a father, how much I wanted a family, so I made a choice. I chose your mother and I chose you. But I am not really yours," Thomas said, a tear rolling down his cheek. Zachary turned to face him fully, his hands on Thomas's shoulders. "You listen to me, son. You are mine. You are my firstborn, my boy. I was there the night you were born and I held you when you were minutes old. I walked the floor with you when you had colic. I taught you to ride and rope. I have been there for every skinned knee, every nightmare, every accomplishment. That is what makes me your father. Not some accident of biology, but choice and love and commitment. Really? Thomas's voice was hopeful. Really? I love you just as much as I love Rose and Benjamin and Clara. There is no difference in my heart. You are all my children, and I would do anything for any of you. Thomas threw his arms around Zachary's neck, hugging him tightly. I love you, Papa. I love you too, son, so much. Zachary held him close, feeling the boy's small body shake with quiet sobs. You never have to worry about that. You are mine and I am yours, and nothing in this world can change that. When they finally pulled apart, Thomas wiped his eyes. The other man, the one who left, do you know who he is? I know his name, but he does not matter. He made a choice to leave, and that was his loss. He missed out on knowing an incredible boy. I am glad you chose us, Thomas said. I am glad you are my papa. I am glad too. Best decision I ever made. That evening, the family gathered for dinner as usual, but there was a new closeness between Zachary and Thomas. The boy sat next to his father, and throughout the meal, they exchanged small smiles and knowing looks. Zelda watched them with a full heart, grateful that the conversation had gone well. Later, after the children were in bed, Zachary told her what had been said. I think he understands now, Zachary said. And I think he feels secure in knowing that I chose him, that he is wanted. Thank you, Zelda said, for loving him the way you do, for being the father he deserves. He makes it easy, Zachary replied. They all do. As the years continued to pass, the Trent family became a fixture in the Marysville community. They attended church regularly, participated in town events, and were known for their generosity and kindness. The children grew and thrived, each developing their own personalities and interests. Thomas, true to his early promise, became an exceptional rancher. By the time he was 16 in 1895, he was doing the work of a full-grown man, and Zachary relied on him heavily. He was responsible and hardworking, with a quiet strength that reminded everyone of his father. Rose, at 14, was beautiful and kind, with a talent for music. Zachary had bought a piano for the house when she was 10, and she had taught herself to play by ear. Her playing filled the house with beauty, and she often performed at church socials. Benjamin, at 11, was the thinker of the family. He loved books and learning and often spoke of becoming a teacher or perhaps even a lawyer. Zachary supported this dream, encouraging his education even though it meant Benjamin might not stay on the ranch. Clara, at 9, was still the firecracker, full of energy and mischief. She could ride as well as any of her brothers and was not afraid of hard work or getting dirty. She declared regularly that she would be a rancher like her father when she grew up. In the fall of 1895, Zelda discovered she was pregnant again, a surprise given that Clara was already 9. She was 40 years old, older than most women having babies, and both she and Zachary were initially worried about the risks. But the doctor assured them she was healthy, and as the pregnancy progressed without complications, they relaxed and embraced the unexpected blessing. The children were excited about the new baby, even Thomas, who was nearly grown. They all pitched in to help Zelda as she grew larger and more tired. In May of 1896, Zelda gave birth to twin boys, another surprise. They named them Daniel and David, and the household erupted with joy and chaos. Having 2 babies at once was exhausting, but with 4 older siblings eager to help, Zelda was never without assistance. Zachary, at 49, found himself a father of newborns again, and he embraced it with the same devotion he had shown all their children. He would walk the floor at night with a baby in each arm, singing old ranch songs until they fell asleep. One night, Watching him with the twins while their other children gathered around, Zelda felt overwhelmed with love and gratitude. This man, who had taken a chance on a pregnant stranger 18 years ago, had given her a life beyond anything she could have imagined. 6 beautiful children, a thriving ranch, a respected place in the community, and most importantly, a love that had only grown stronger with time. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary asked, noticing her gaze. "About how lucky I am," she said simply. "About how much I love you and our family." "I am the lucky one," he insisted, as he always did. "You and these children, you are everything to me." Thomas, now a young man of 17, stood and placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "We are lucky to have you too, Papa. All of us." It was a moment of perfect contentment, the whole family together, bound by love that transcended biology or circumstance. This was what family was supposed to be, Zelda thought. Not perfect, but real and loving and committed to each other. As the twins grew, the house became even livelier. Rose married a young rancher from a neighboring property when she was 18, and her wedding was the social event of the season in Marysville. Zelda cried through the whole ceremony, watching her first daughter pledge her life to a good man who clearly adored her. Thomas showed no interest in settling down yet, too focused on the ranch and helping his father. At 20, he was a full partner in the operation, and Zachary had started making plans to eventually turn the ranch over to him when he was ready to retire. Benjamin, true to his dreams, went away to school in Topeka when he was 16, studying law. He came home for holidays and summers, full of stories about his studies and the larger world beyond Marysville. Zachary was proud of him, even though it meant losing his help on the ranch. Clara, at 15, was still determined to be a rancher. She worked alongside Thomas and Zachary, proving herself just as capable as any man. She had no patience for traditional women's work, preferring to be outside with the cattle. The twins, Daniel and David, were 6 years old in 1902, mirror images of each other with their mother's brown eyes and their father's dark hair. They were inseparable, always getting into mischief together, but with such charm that it was hard to stay angry with them. One evening in late summer, as the family gathered for dinner, Thomas made an announcement. "I have been thinking about something," he said, looking nervous. "There is a piece of land that borders our property to the east. It is going up for sale, and I would like to buy it. Start my own ranch." The table fell silent. Zachary set down his fork, his expression unreadable. "Your own ranch," he repeated. "Yes, sir. I do not want to leave the family or stop working with you, but I am 23 now, and I think it is time I start building something of my own. The land is good, and I have been saving my wages. With a loan from the bank, I think I can make it work." Zachary looked at his son for a long moment, and Zelda held her breath, wondering what he would say. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. "I think that is a fine idea, son. A man should build his own legacy. I will help you however I can." Thomas's relief was visible. "Really, you are not angry. I am proud. You have learned well and you are ready. Besides," Zachary added with a grin, "it is not like you are going far. We will still be neighbors and partners." The family celebrated Thomas's decision, and over the next months, they all pitched in to help him build a small house on his new property and get his operation started. It was hard work, but good work, and Zelda felt a bittersweet pride watching her firstborn step into his own life. At the house raising, when neighbors and friends came to help Thomas build his home, Zelda stood with Zachary and watched the work. "He is a good man," she said softly. "You raised him well." "We raised him well," Zachary corrected. "You gave him life, and together we gave him everything else." "Do you ever wonder what happened to Charles, the man who fathered him?" Zachary shrugged. "Not really. He is irrelevant. Thomas is mine. Always has been, always will be. Zelda leaned against her husband, content. 24 years had passed since she stepped off that stagecoach, terrified and pregnant and desperate. Now she stood surrounded by the life they had built together, rich in love if not always in money. Rose came over with her baby daughter, Zachary and Zelda's first grandchild, born earlier that year. "Mama, can you hold her while I help serve the lunch?" Zelda took the baby eagerly, cradling her granddaughter close. The baby had Zachary's gray eyes, and holding her, Zelda felt the circle of life continuing. Her children were having children of their own now, starting families and building futures. That evening, after everyone had gone home and the children were in bed, Zelda and Zachary sat on their porch, a habit they had maintained for over 2 decades. "I have been thinking," Zelda said, "about the day we met, about how scared I was and how sure I was that my life was ruined. And now?" Zachary asked, taking her hand. "Now I know that day was not the end of my life but the beginning. You gave me everything, Zachary. A home, children, love, respect. You saved me." "We saved each other," he said. "I was lonely and drifting before you came. You gave me purpose and family. We built this life together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over the prairie. It was the same view they had been looking at for years, but it never got old. This land, this home, this life, it was theirs, earned through hard work and commitment and love. Over the next years, the family continued to grow and change. Benjamin finished his law studies and opened a practice in Topeka, but visited regularly. Thomas married a sweet young woman named Sarah from town when he was 25, and they had their first child, a son, a year later. Rose had 2 more children, both boys. Clara, defying everyone's expectations, married at 20, but only after finding a man who supported her dream of ranching. Together, they ran a successful cattle operation. Daniel and David, the twins, grew into their teenage years, still inseparable and still charming everyone they met. They worked the ranch with their father, learning the trade. In 1910, Zelda and Zachary celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary. They were both in their 60s now, graying and slowing down, but still healthy and active. The ranch was thriving under Thomas's management, and they had gradually turned over most of the daily operations to their children. They had 14 grandchildren now, with more on the way, and the extended family gathered regularly for Sunday dinners and holidays. The house was always full of noise and laughter and love. One quiet afternoon, Zelda found Zachary in the barn, working on repairing a bridle even though Thomas had told him repeatedly that he did not need to do such work anymore. "I like to stay busy," Zachary had said. "Keeps me young." Zelda came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her cheek against his back. "What is this for?" he asked, turning in her embrace to face her. "I just wanted to hold you," she said, "and tell you that I love you, that I have loved every day of our life together." Zachary cupped her face in his weathered hands, his gray eyes warm as they looked into hers. "I love you too, more than anything in this world." He leaned down to kiss her, and it was as sweet and meaningful as their first kiss in that church all those years ago. They had built something beautiful together, something lasting. "You have any regrets?" Zelda asked when they pulled apart. "Not a single one," Zachary said without hesitation. "Every choice I made, every challenge we faced, it all led to this, to us, to our family, to the life we have built. How could I regret any of it? I regret the pain I caused you sometimes," Zelda admitted. "The worry and uncertainty in the beginning. Zelda, my love, listen to me." Zachary pulled her close, holding her against his chest. "You did not cause me pain. You brought me joy." "Yes, We had challenges, but we faced them together and we came out stronger. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." They stood there in the quiet barn, holding each other, two people who had taken a chance on each other and built something extraordinary. That evening, the family gathered for dinner as they did every Sunday. Thomas and his family, Rose and her husband and children, Benjamin, who was visiting from Topeka, Clara and her husband, the twins who still lived at home. Spouses and grandchildren filled every chair and spilled over onto benches brought in from outside. The table was laden with food, and the conversation was loud and cheerful, with everyone talking over each other to share news and stories. Zelda looked around at all these people, her family, and felt her heart could hardly contain all the love she felt. Zachary caught her eye from across the table and smiled, that special smile he reserved just for her. After all these years, he could still make her heart skip a beat. After dinner, when the dishes were washed and the evening was winding down, the family gathered in the parlor. Rose played the piano while some of the grandchildren sang. Thomas told stories about the ranch, making everyone laugh. It was perfect and ordinary and everything Zelda had ever wanted. As the evening grew late and families began to head home, Thomas lingered behind. He found Zelda in the kitchen, wrapping leftover food. "Mama, can I tell you something?" he asked. "Of course, dear." "Sarah is expecting again. We are going to have our fourth child." Zelda hugged him tight. "That is wonderful news. I am so happy for you." "I was thinking," Thomas continued, "about how Papa took me in when I was not even born yet, how he loved me like his own. And I look at my children and I understand now what a gift that was, how much love it took to do what he did." "Your Papa is a special man," Zelda agreed. "You both are," Thomas said. "You gave me a good life, a good example of what a marriage and family should be. Everything I am, I owe to you and Papa." Tears filled Zelda's eyes. "You are everything we hoped you would be, Thomas. We are so proud of you." They stood together in the kitchen, mother and son, and Zelda thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that terrifying stagecoach ride to this moment of peace and joy, it had been a long road, but every step had been worth it. As the years continued, Zachary and Zelda aged gracefully, surrounded by their growing family. They became the patriarch and matriarch of not just their own family, but of the Marysville community. People sought their advice and wisdom, and they were known for their generosity and kindness. In 1915, they celebrated their 37th anniversary with a party that drew people from all over the county. The house and yard overflowed with friends and family, and speeches were made honoring the couple who had built such a strong legacy. Thomas stood to speak, his own children gathered around him. "My father once told me that being a father is about choice and love and commitment, not just biology. He lived that truth every day of his life, from the day he chose to raise me as his own to now, as he loves all his children and grandchildren with equal devotion. Papa, Mama, you have shown us all what love looks like. Thank you for the example you set." There was not a dry eye in the crowd as Zachary and Zelda stood together, still holding hands after all these years. They had built something beautiful, something that would last long after they were gone. As the sun set on that celebration, painting the prairie sky in brilliant colors, Zelda leaned against her husband and thought about the young woman she had been when she arrived in Marysville. That frightened girl could never have imagined this life, this love, this family. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary asked, as he had so many times over the years. "About how blessed I am," Zelda said. "About how you took a broken, frightened young woman and helped her build a beautiful life." "We built it together," Zachary insisted. "Every bit of it." And as they stood there, surrounded by the family they had created, watching the sun set on another perfect day, Zelda knew he was right. They had built it together, brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. A life full of love and purpose and meaning. The stagecoach had brought her to Marysville carrying another man's child, scared and ashamed and desperate. But the cowboy who met her that day had said, "I will raise him as mine," and in doing so had changed everything. He had given her love when she expected judgment, acceptance when she deserved condemnation, and a future when she thought she had none. And together, they had created something beautiful. A family bound not just by blood, but by choice and commitment and unwavering love. A legacy that would endure for generations, all because one man had been brave enough to see past circumstances to the person underneath, and kind enough to offer a second chance. As the stars came out over the Kansas prairie, Zelda Trent, once Zelda Norton, knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly the person she was meant to be with, living exactly the life she was meant to live. And it was more than she ever could have dreamed. Their story was not over yet. They would have many more years together, watching their family continue to grow and thrive. They would see great-grandchildren born and celebrate golden anniversaries for their own children. They would face sorrows and joys, as all families do. But through it all, they would have each other and the unshakable foundation of love they had built together. When Zachary passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 83, in 1923, Zelda mourned deeply, but took comfort in the fact that they had lived a full and beautiful life together. She survived him by 5 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren who loved her fiercely. On her deathbed at 72, she gathered her children around her. Thomas, now 54 and a grandfather himself, held her hand. "Tell me again, Mama," he said, "about the day you met Papa." And Zelda, with her last strength, told the story one more time. How she had been so afraid, how Zachary had been so kind, how he had looked at her pregnant belly and said, "I will raise the child as mine." How he had kept that promise every day of his life, and in doing so had given her everything. "That is love," she whispered. "Real, true love. Not just words, but actions. Not just feelings, but choices made over and over, day after day. Your father showed me what love really means, and I hope I showed him the same." "You did, Mama," Rose assured her, tears streaming down her face. "You both did. You loved each other so well." Zelda smiled, her eyes closing. "Tell your children," she said. "Tell your grandchildren. Tell them about the cowboy who raised another man's son as his own and the love that grew from that choice. Tell them that family is not just about blood. It is about showing up. It is about choosing each other, over and over, no matter what." Those were her last words, and they echoed through the generations that followed. The story of Zachary and Zelda Trent became family legend, passed down through children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The story of how a mail-order bride arrived pregnant with another man's baby, and the cowboy who said he would raise him as his own, and how that choice created a legacy of love that lasted forever. And on the prairie outside Marysville, Kansas, that legacy continued generation after generation, a testament to the power of choice, commitment, and unconditional love. The ranch prospered under Thomas's descendants, who never forgot the lessons their great-grandparents had taught them about what it means to be a family. In the end, it was not where you came from that mattered, but the choices you made and the love you gave. Zachary and Zelda had proven that beyond any doubt, and their story remained an inspiration long after they were gone. A reminder that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with a simple choice to be kind, to be brave, and to love without conditions or limitations.